Recent reporting from Detroit has uncovered new details about damning conduct in 2020 by then-President Donald Trump and the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, as they tried to corruptly and perhaps illegally pressure two Michigan election officials to not certify the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, we have several clips to get to with respect to this story. I just want to say, it's 2023, and it seems like we're never going to get to the bottom of Donald Trump's nefarious, multifaceted campaign to steal an election from Joe Biden, a legitimate election, and undermine democracy. Because here we are learning new details about relatively old stories. The base story here is nothing new, but the details are new and they are damning, and they potentially expose Donald Trump to additional criminal prosecution and perhaps criminal prosecution for the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee. So it's big stuff. Let's play the clips and we'll unpack them together.
To the fallout over that bombshell reporting out of Michigan, the Detroit News saying it's obtained an audio recording of a phone call on November 17th, 2020, where then President Donald Trump and RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel are heard pressuring two Republican election officials not to certify the vote. Trump can reportedly be heard on the call saying it'd be, quote, terrible if they did so, and both Trump and McDaniel offer the two legal assistants to not sign the documents needed to certify.
So that's basically the gist of it. I do want to look at the actual article itself because this came from an exclusive report from the Detroit News, okay? Let's see here. We're not going to read the whole thing. But then President Donald Trump personally pressured two Republican members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers not to sign the certification of the 2020 presidential election, according to recordings reviewed by the Detroit News and revealed publicly for the first time. A November 17, 2020 phone call, which also involved Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, who, by the way, is also Mitt Romney's niece, Trump told Monica Palmer and William Hartman, the two GOP Wayne County canvassers, that they'd look, quote, terrible if they signed the documents after they first voted in opposition and then later in the same meeting voted to approve the certification of the county's election results, according to the recordings. Now, I just want to establish or remind you, before the 2020 election, months before the election, during the election, and after the election, Donald Trump was framing the issue that the only way he could possibly lose to Joe Biden or to anybody is if the election was rigged and stolen. He also did this in 2016, by the way. So he pre-framed the issue in the minds of millions of Republicans across this country, including crucial Republicans like members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers, that basically, again, that the only way he could lose is if it was illegitimate. So during the meeting in which the Wayne County Board of Canvassers was to certify the results of the election in that county, which includes Detroit, these two Republicans initially voted in opposition to it, despite having no evidence whatsoever to do it. And it was so bad that the others were like, guys, come on. You have no evidence not to certify the results of this election besides what your cult leader is telling you. So let's just go ahead and do the right thing. And so they were like, yeah, you're right. We need to do the right thing. And they voted to certify it, but they didn't sign it yet. So there was still some wiggle room in the minds of Donald Trump and Ronna McDaniel, even though the law seems to suggest otherwise. So that brings us back to the report. According to the phone call, quote, "We've got to fight for our country," said Trump on the recordings made by a person who was present for the call with Palmer and Hartman. Quote, "We can't let these people take our country away from us." McDaniel, a Michigan native and the leader of the Republican Party nationally, said at another point in the call, "If you can go home tonight, do not sign it. We will get you attorneys." To which Trump added, "We will take care of that." That potentially constitutes a bribe, folks, that they will pay for the legal representation needed to challenge the votes that they'd already made. And folks, it's so bad that you even have Republican operatives like Karl Rove, who was basically known as Darth Vader during the Bush administration. He and Dick Cheney were like two supervillains at the time. Even he is like, Trump and McDaniel are in deep water.
All right, I want to ask you about something else that's popped up, and this is the Detroit News is reporting on a recorded phone conversation between former President Donald Trump, the RNC chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, and two Wayne County Board of Election officials. This was about certifying the results of the 2020 election. They quote Donald Trump as saying, "We've got to fight for our country. We can't let these people take our country away from us." Ronna McDaniel then says, "If you can go home tonight, do not sign it." That's the certification of the election results. "We will get you attorneys," followed by Trump saying, "We will take care of that." Those two officials apparently had already voted to certify the results. They tried to rescind their votes, but weren't able to do so. What do you make of all this?
I think the former president's got a problem with this. They had voted to certify the election. He attempted to force them to change their decision, which they tried to do. I think this is what we would call election interference. And just as he got into trouble in Georgia over a similar act, calling the Secretary of State and saying, "Find me 11,000 some odd more votes," this is a problem. The former president should not have been doing this. These people are supposedly independent officials who are supposed to certify the election based upon their review of the process and the procedures in place, and he's attempting to get them to change their opinion after the fact. This is not a good move if accurate, and if this tape is true. The former president's created another problem for himself.
Again, that's damning coming from a lifelong conservative and Republican like Karl Rove, and this being also aired on the Fox propaganda network. Damning. But again, to be clear, Karl Rove doesn't just mince words for Donald Trump. He also says the current leader of the Republican Party with respect to, obviously the current leader of the Republican Party is Donald Trump, but the official leader in terms of the national efforts to get Republicans elected is Ronna McDaniel. And Karl Rove says she's not in a good place either.
It's not a good move if accurate, and if this tape is true. The former president's created another problem for himself.
Real quick, is this a problem for Ronna McDaniel as well? She's usually very cautious about things like this.
Oh, I think it is. I think the chairman is in trouble here because she's saying to them, if you agree to change your decision on certification in Wayne County, we'll get you lawyers to stand by you. And again, I think that was highly inappropriate.
To say the least. It's not just obviously corrupt and unethical, but that's the Republican Party in a nutshell. They're objectively, as a party, Republican elected officials are objectively morally inferior, by and large, to Democratic elected officials. It's just a corrupt and venal party. But it's not just a matter of potential corruption. It's also a matter of potential criminal liability. And this is George Conway, another lifelong Republican, a guy who was married to Kellyanne Conway, the Trump supporter who coined the phrase alternate facts. This is what he has to say about Ronna McDaniel.
It's crazy and corrupt. And I got to say this about my former political party. Ronna McDaniel, the woman who changed her name so that it wouldn't displease Donald Trump. This is just the sleaziest thing ever. Whether or not it's criminal, we'll set that aside. It's just the sleaziest thing ever. And if my former political party had any decency or shame, she'd be out on her ass. Forgive my language.
And she should be for a variety of reasons. But people point out on Twitter, they actually cite the Michigan Penal Code, and this is apparently an attorney here. It seems like Ronna McDaniel could be in some trouble in Michigan, and Donald Trump may be facing a fifth set of charges. A promise was offered in exchange for an official act, unlike in Georgia, where the preferred method appears to have been limited to browbeating state officials. And part of the Michigan Penal Code, it talks about public officer bribery. Again, the case can be made. We'll see if it actually comes through. But all that aside, Ronna McDaniel's a loser. I love it as a progressive Democrat who wants to see the Republican continue to lose and lose and lose election after election after election. The best possible thing for us is for Ronna McDaniel to remain in power because she sucks at her job, just objectively. Even other people are complaining about it. Ronna McDaniel's trending good a time as ever to remind y'all everything Republicans have lost since she became the GOP chair in 2017. And folks, the list is extraordinary. Governorships, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, Michigan Supreme Court, House seats, the presidents. It's devastating. She is presiding over a terrible record. People like Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro, two prominent right-wing conservative commentators, they want her gone. She sucks at her job. So I suppose for the sake of the country's health and democracy, we should probably hope that she remains in it as long as possible. But yeah, that's where we are. We're at a place where we're learning new damning information about old stories such that Donald Trump and Ronna McDaniel may face some sort of criminal prosecution as a result of what is alleged in these recordings. That's pretty bad. Let me know what you think in the comments.